And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Talk podcast. I'm your host, Harris Sereno. Alongside me, co-host Dan Kiley, Kobe Piers. Episode 146, gentlemen, on this cold but melting snow evening over here in Athens and Atlanta, the greater Atlanta area, I should say. Gentlemen, how are we doing on this wonderful Wednesday evening? I said Tuesday earlier. Damn it, boy. Shout out, Dan.
Doing well, man. Had to do a little bit of work today. The last couple of days, I didn't get to have a stay-home snow day like everybody else. So, but damn, they need to send those kids back to school. My son hasn't been in school like 8 days.
Damn. All right, Feds, if you heard that, lock them up. I'm messing.
Kobe? We're doing good over here in Athens. Like saying, snow had us locked in this morning. A little late to work this afternoon, about 1 o'clock. Just ready for it to kind of melt. At some point, I'm of the mindset that the little small amount of snow we got is not worth the headache that it kind of creates. So if we're going to get some snow, let me get 4, 5, 6 inches, be able to play in it, do something, make some snowmen.
Heck yeah. Let's start with some reactions here. Dan had to step away for a minute. He'll be right back. Kobe, Ohio State in Ryan Day finally get over the hump, beating Notre Dame 34-23. Can I just come out and say this game was a little bit closer than I thought it was going to be? I was just adamant Notre Dame's about to catch belt to ass for 4 quarters, and it was trending that way for the first 3 quarters. Well, maybe the first 2. I thought coming out of halftime, all right, this is where they're going to step on their throat. It's over. And got to give credit to Notre Dame. Came back, made it a little bit of a ball game, got it within 2 scores, made it look a little bit closer than it was in the end.
Yeah, I think that, like you're saying, if I'm a Notre Dame fan, the biggest positive I'm taking away from this is Marcus Freeman this season and this playoff run has really shown me what a great decision we made when Brian Kelly, stepped away, said, hey, man, you can't win here. It's not a winning environment. I've tried. I've created the culture. We've been to a natty. You just can't win at Notre Dame. And made his way to Baton Rouge. And Marcus Freeman really has just put nose to the grindstone. He has built a physically tough football team and a mentally tough football team. I think Brian Kelly had plenty of physically tough football teams over the years. I'm not sure how mentally tough they were, along with himself as running Notre Dame. But, I mean, man, they put up quite the fight. And they did things, to me, the hard way. They did the things the way they have played and won all year. I mean, I looked at one point, and Riley Leonard had like 85 rushing yards and 85 passing yards. I mean, just that consistency from him is just unbelievable that he was able to do that week in and week out all season and all postseason. Just shout out to him for his durability. I think that's going to find him on a roster at the next level very soon doing things like that.
I think if you're a Notre Dame fan, you have to be a little bit excited. To your point, Brian Kelly did have some good football teams in Notre Dame, but I think with Marcus Freeman, you have a good defensive coach who very much the same way that Kirby kind of stole from Alabama, the way that he built the Jordan. And I always laugh when people say, you did it the same way as Alabama. I don't see that as a criticism. Okay. I think smart people watch other smart people do things and then they emulate it and try to make it better if they can. And I think that he's taken the blueprint that Alabama had, that Georgia had, even Michigan, from the last year, where they're built on the defensive side of the football. And really, honestly, if you can't score on a team, you're going to have a hard time trying to beat them. And, to your point, Kobe, it was a very physical team. Like when Georgia played against Notre Dame, I think that's one of the things that really stood out to me was how physically tough it was for us to do anything. It was like that game was excruciating to watch because Georgia could not do anything. And I think that is a huge compliment to Notre Dame. Their program under Freeman is they are really tough and really physical. Listen, I think everyone knew that Ohio State was the most talented team in the country. I know we've been saying it ad nauseum, but they really did put up a fight. and they didn't quit. And that's something that you saw out of this Georgia team this year as well, where they just didn't quit. We didn't necessarily win every single game, but we didn't quit. The only reason I draw the comparisons is because if you look at how Kirby started the program at Georgia, and now granted, he wasn't taken over from ground zero, but neither was Freeman. I think there are a lot of comparisons to be made between where Notre Dame is right now and where Georgia was when Kirby took over those first couple of years. And I say that as a compliment. I don't say that in any type of way I'm not trying to take anything away from Notre Dame or anything like that. I just think that he's doing it the right way, and that's why I'm making the comparison, because I think he's doing it the way it's supposed to be done.
Dan, I have a question for you, talking about your point about Ohio State's roster. I mean, from the jump, I remember on this show, I think it was back in like July, I remember you saying this was on paper the best roster in college football. And we stuck with it throughout the year. If Ohio State gets hot, they're as good as anybody, better than almost anybody at this point. Here's my question to you, Dan. There was a lot of talk, and Kobe, you can chime in on this as well. I just wanted to bounce this off of Dan's point. There's been a lot of talk this year about the $20 million rosters. Oh, Ohio State spent $20 million on their roster. Texas spent $20 million on their roster. Georgia spent $18 million on their roster. Do you think, with how this season played out, is that going to become less and less of a conversation? Or is this going to continue to spur the headline of, oh, so-and-so has a $20 million roster?
So here's the thing that makes me a little bit agitated when we talk about this. They were not number one or number two for that matter. They were number three, like you said. I think so. For whatever reason in the rankings, Oregon didn't show up, but Oregon is number one. They spent more money on their roster through NIL, but somehow they're able to hide it, or it didn't show up on the list that they had. So if you include Oregon at number one, that would push Ohio State to number four, actually. But what does it matter? I hate Ohio State, so don't get it twisted. Like, I'm not here to defend Ohio State, but they are playing within the rules that exist at this moment, and they went and spent $20 million. Their $20 million spent better than your $20 million. Hell, their $20 million spent better than our 18 at Georgia. I mean, it is what it is. They got the right guys. They went and got Caleb Downs, the best defensive player in the country. They went, in my opinion. They went and got Quayshawn Judkins from Ole Miss, who was able to pair up with Travion Henderson, and that was everything they needed on the offensive side. They got Jeremiah Smith in the building. They spin it in the right places. I hate NIL. I hate what it's doing to the game. But if that is the rules that exist, and you are within the rules, then you're not going to catch hell from me. You're just not. I'm not here for that. I think it's a foolish argument. Everyone's allowed to spend money. Kobe, you could spend the money. Harrison, you could spend the money. It doesn't matter. West Virginia, if they want to spend $54 million this year on a roster, under the rules that exist right now, they can do it. If Stanford and all their money that they have out there, if they want to spend $200 million on a roster, they can do it. It is what it is. So, it is what it is. You're right, Juan. They have the ability, they just don't want to. So I don't know. I just think it's a foolish argument for right now. As long as they're, yeah, I understand.
Hey,
but they have, Palo Alto has money.
Getting it to your point there, I think this was like when I went back and looked upon the season, specifically week 0, College Game Day, first College Game Day of the year, the debut of Nick Saban. He went viral with the quote that summed it up all year for Florida State. I don't care if you spent $20 million, you spent it on the wrong people, you're, and I quote, shit out of luck. That was his quote. And look what FSU spent on their roster. Mostly built out of the portal, and look at the results over there. Won 2 games all year long. Shit out of luck there, Kobe.
Yeah, I think that, like you're saying, to say, oh, Ohio State bought a roster is not 100% accurate. I mean, like you're saying, they were very strategic, but like any really good team, they had solid depth that was recruited at Ohio State. And then some of the best teams, especially for national championship runs, kind of like the 2 you've seen the past couple of years with Michigan and Ohio State, is those guys that are like right on the cusp of good enough to be drafted in the third round or above that choose to come back and play that one more year. I mean, I think that's what's not always stated enough is look at all these guys that came back for that fourth or fifth year at Ohio State to play to make that run possible one more time. They make a decision to change quarterbacks. I think, obviously hindsight 2020, Will Howard has a really good year. They, ends up winning the national championship. I'm not sure Kyle McCord wouldn't have had just as good of a year. So is that money that was well spent or not well spent? We'll never know. He won a national championship. So, I think that, like you're saying, $20 million, it doesn't blow me away when you start to talk about a 135-man roster. When you start doing that math, that's not as much money per person as you think. Obviously, you have some guys that are making a lot more than the other guy. But, I think about the receiver they have, Jeremiah Smith. I'll kind of pose this question back to the two of you. After the year he's had as a freshman right now, I don't see him taking an NIL deal south of what Carson Beck just took a year. I would imagine. Who wouldn't pay $3 or $4 million to that man to be on their team for the next year or two? I guess that going forward, I see that people are going to be spending, 25, 30, 40 as these players continue to get more and more valuable and as players continue to sign deals. Harrison, what would you be willing to pay for someone like Jeremiah Smith or just in general, Jeremiah Smith? Yeah.
I mean, considering there's a lot of draft analysts out there saying he could be the first receiver taken in the draft this year as a true freshman, I would, obviously have to pay whatever it took to get him. I mean, I would love to know what his value was coming out of high school because whatever it is, it's at least doubled since he's gotten to Ohio State.
I think that'll be interesting to see over the course of the next couple of years is as good of a year as he had this year, who comes calling to his camp saying, whatever you're making at Ohio State, double it. Whatever you're making at Ohio State, triple it. We want you to be a Oregon Duck. Like you're saying, Texas Longhorn. We'll whatever you want, whatever you need, we can make it happen. And I think that's the new interesting part of NIL as people have these really, really good years. I think that when NIL started, people were focused on, a lot of these high school recruits, incoming freshmen, they signed big deals to get them there. I think now you're going to get into the portal era of NIL of how much money are you spending to keep people here? Because when underclassmen specifically have good years like he's had, that number's only going to start going up and up and up.
Yeah. I know I got us off track there talking about the $20 million rosters, but I thought it added to the conversation. I was curious because I've seen everyone posting and arguing over, who had the highest paid roster and all this and that, whether or not I was surprised. I dug up this stat looking over the stat sheet from this game. And I don't know what your thoughts would be if you heard this before the game even happened. Riley Leonard finished the game with 255 yards passing. That is the most passing yards he's had in the game all year long. Hasn't passed for more yards than that since 2022. Just for context there. That shocked me. 255. I would have thought, hey, maybe he's probably gone higher than that. But no, that is the most he's thrown for all year. Then you go look into what maybe Josh Pate would call a padlock stat. Riley Leonard finished with 40 yards and 17 carries. Notre Dame was outrushed by Ohio State 214 to 53. Did what it had took to win. I mean, both sides sacked twice, just twice, all game long. Y'all mentioned Will Howard earlier, how well he's played. I don't know if there's ever been a bigger glow up from a quarterback from the regular season to the postseason in terms of step up in performance. That dude played lights out from right after the Michigan game up until the national championship game. Lights out by far. Any questions about whether or not quarterbacks are important in the college football playoff? They are very, very important. shouts out to him. I'm curious to see what his draft stock looks like coming out of college after a terrific postseason run there. Really, really curious to see where that goes. Finished with the number 1 QBR in the country. Gentlemen, I have another stat for you. Then I'll kick it over to one of you, whoever wants to go next. I guess we'll kick it over to Dan because Dan had to step away for a moment. For anyone saying that, offense now wins championships in college football, Ohio State tweeted out this stat, and I think it would be the perfect point to point out the defense still does win. Ohio State finished with the number 1 scoring defense, number 1 total defense, number 1 total yards allowed per play, number 1 total touchdowns allowed per game, and number 1 in opponent total touchdowns scored in the red zone, playing 16 games. Pretty damn good.
Yeah, but you know what else they tweeted out? Sorry, Dan, to jump you. I also saw they tweeted out that they had the only team in the country that had 4 different players have over 1,000 yards from scrimmage. Damn. 2 receivers and both the running backs.
In fairness, they all got to play an extra half of a season, but it is what it is. What I was going to say is I thought it was probably the biggest factor in the game that Notre Dame could not get pressure on Will Howard. And I did see, so my timeline has now become all Notre Dame fans. I'm not 100% sure why that happened, but it did.
Oh, I know why.
But there was a lot of people that were really upset with Al Golden, saying that he was doing and granted, I haven't watched every Notre Dame game and I haven't studied their defense ad nauseum. So apparently he was blitzing a lot more than he was throughout the season and playing a lot more one-on-one on the back end. And there were some Notre Dame fans that were pretty upset about it. Whether or not that's true or not, whether he blitzed more than he usually does or not, I think the biggest takeaway is the fact that they couldn't get home. And then because the play, I think we can all agree that the play that won the game for Ohio State was the 3rd and 11 that he hit Jeremiah Smith down the sideline. I believe it was 3rd and 11, right? And he hits Jeremiah Smith down the sideline one-on-one. Number 29 for Notre Dame was in coverage. And it was it wasn't a blown coverage. He just couldn't keep up with him. I don't understand in real time when it happened, Harrison, you can attest. I was like, how do you let that happen? Well, they sent the house and they didn't get there. But that's the big takeaway for me is that they couldn't do that. But yeah, Ohio State again, really good team, especially defensively, which really makes you wonder how in the hell that Michigan game happened, right? I think my biggest takeaway from watching that national championship game, let me take one step back. My biggest takeaway from watching Ohio State in the postseason was how in the hell did they lose that Michigan game? I don't have answers other than they just didn't give a shit that day. I can't come up with a concrete reason. And my stepdad will tell you it's because we're Michigan. Whatever. I can't come up with one.
I guess that game, in retrospect, gives credence when people say, why is Georgia playing Georgia Tech close? Why is Michigan beating Ohio State? Why, are so many of these rivalry games where you have an inferior team playing closer, beating what is supposed to be the superior team? I guess it gives credence to the fact rivalries are rivalries, and that's what makes the sport great. They know each other just as well as anybody does in terms of opponent and opponent. I guess that's the weird thing to me too, Dan, is the only moment that has looked too big for Ohio State has been those Michigan games, which is really crazy considering it is the regular season finale. And at least for this year, really had no impact in terms of their postseason futures, other than they just had to go play the number 1 seed. They had to go play the number 5 seed en route to a national championship game where they could have beat Notre Dame by 3 or 4 scores if they didn't maybe let their foot off the gas a little bit there in the second half. What do you say? What say you, Kobe?
I think that, like Shane, I think that rivalry games are crazy. I think that if you had to look back, and you're an Ohio State fan, I know it sucked to lose that game because nobody wants to lose a game like that to a rival. I would have to think that you would say, thank you for waking this team up. Because if anything, the beatdown, mentally they took that day kind of propelled them into the postseason. They didn't have to play in the Big Ten championship game. They kind of got a week to get their mind right, and they came out with a vengeance and a fury. They took it out on Tennessee. They took it out on Texas. They took it out on Oregon. I mean, from start to finish, they were a menace in the postseason. And you just have to wonder if they win that game 17-13 and have to play Oregon in a Big Ten championship game, is that same fire there? Obviously, don't know. Never happened. They're national champions. But I definitely think that games like that can kind of wake you up and make you realize, hey, man, we're a lot better than what we just did out there. And at some point, we're one of the best teams in the country. We can't be in games with inferior opponents like this.
As we transition into our season takeaway segment, I guess I'll throw this one out, and then we're going to go rapid fire with this. We're just going to start listing them off. Dan, I'll come to you first right after this. My biggest takeaway from this season is to the fan bases that are fans of teams that can't get over the hump. What Ohio State just was until now. What Texas may be. What Oregon may be. Who else? Notre Dame possibly. Let's not be so quick and irrational to cast out a coach, to say he just doesn't make the cut. Because imagine what would have happened if Ohio State had gotten rid of Ryan Day, like many fans have wanted for the last year or so, 2 years. I mean, heck, the noise had never gotten louder than after that Michigan loss. For the third or fourth year in a row, they had lost to Michigan, and my God, they were ready to tear the whole place down to get that man out of his job. Patience. I preach patience. If the farthest, hardest jump you got to make is going from a 10-win team, going from good to great, it's going to take some time. It doesn't happen overnight. Let's not be so quick to say a coach doesn't make the cut, would be my, biggest takeaway of the season. Dan, rapid fire time. What do you got?
My biggest takeaway was the narrative every single year leading up to this year was we don't need to expand the playoffs because nobody outside of the top four deserves a shot. Nobody outside the top four can compete. It's only 4 good teams. First year of an expanded playoffs, we have 7 and 8 playing for the national title, and number 8 wins it. So I think that narrative was completely destroyed. Listen, there reasons for it, sure, absolutely. But I definitely have been part of that where I thought outside of the top 2 or 3 teams, there really wasn't anybody. But we see in a playoff format, just like the NFL, the best team doesn't always win. I mean, maybe they did this year. I'm not sure. And the other biggest takeaway for me is the longer season and the ability to make the playoffs with multiple losses did not take away from my love of the regular season. It didn't deem the regular season irrelevant like college basketball. So those are my 2 biggest takeaways from this year.
Damn it, Dan. Leave it one thing at a time. I'm gonna go on a little bit different of a rant than Dan there on the regular season part. I think not irrelevant's the word, but when you look at some of the most important games of the season, some games that we've talked about, it takes the pressure, the sting, the fact that you lose a game kind of becomes null and void. I mean, you think about 2 or 3 years ago, the loss to Michigan on the last game of the year, knocking you out of the Big Ten championship game, would have been a backbreaker for the Ohio State program. It would have knocked you out of the championship game, out of postseason contention, and you would have been on the outside looking in. You look at Notre Dame, you have a huge loss to Northern Illinois in the season, a game that they were numerous touchdown favorites in. It doesn't matter. They take care of business the rest of the year. They get in as a 7 seed. You have, even us. You go to Alabama and lose. You go to Ole Miss and lose, and you still end up the 2 seed because you're in the SEC championship and you win the SEC championship. I just think that as the season and playoff expands, especially with the, possibly moving away from the auto bids of being in. It just is going to be some of those late season games where you're both 11-1 or 10-1. It's just not going to matter as much. I look at Georgia Tennessee. It was a massive game. We win. We both still get in. At the end of the day, did it matter that Tennessee lost that game in Athens? Not really. So, like you said, I'd say the biggest takeaway from the year for me is just that some of those marquee matchups in the season just don't quite have the same stakes as they once did.
And riding off that, little hot topic-esque here, let's talk about college football playoff expansion. Here's my question to you. Was it the right move? Dan, you want to kick us off? You're muted, sir. Damn it, boy.
Rephrase the question.
Was college football playoff expansion the right move?
I would have went to 8. This is something that you and I have talked about a little bit. I would have went to 8. I think we saw that there were obviously some teams that did not belong. However, I will admit when I'm wrong, and I'm wrong a lot, but I was wrong that nobody outside the top 3 or 4 could compete. However, I think 8 was the right number, not 12. And if we're being realistic, they'll probably go to 16 before long. It's going to get watered down for sure. And then to Kobe's point about the sting coming out of a loss will be completely gone. And those marquee matchups won't mean as much. But it might get us better matchups during the regular season, which would be good, right? Any place where I get more and better football, I'm down for it. But, yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, I think that, like you're saying, I think expansion was always needed. You were leaving out some really, really good 5 seeds year after year. I think 8 would have been nice. I think anytime you expand to do it in a lesser model, like you're never going back down. Like we're never going to go from 12 back to 8. The money's just too good. They're enjoying the money way too much. Maybe you move it to 8 for a couple years, and then if you're like, hey, I still think we're leaving out a 9 or a 10 seed here or there, you could have moved it to 12. But I'm with Dan. Thank you, Dan Kiley, in the chat. I appreciate that.
I wonder who that guy is. Nice name.
I would think, I don't know. I think we'll have to see the next couple of years if any 9 through 12 seeds win. I think the biggest thing this year that you're safe from expansion is pretty much the 9, 10, 11, and 12 seed all got smacked pretty handedly in the first round. And then, but on the opposite end there, the 1, 2, 3, and 4 seed also all went home. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that continues to shake out as the years go down. The first year of the regular playoff, Ohio State wins as the 4 seed. This year they win as the 8 seed. I don't think a lot of 4 seeds won besides them and Alabama, if I remember right. But it's the new norm. Like it or not, it's here to stay. So we'll see.
I think the most interesting part of this whole college football expansion question, and as Dan pointed out, we thought outside of the top 4 seeds or outside of the top 4 teams, you probably weren't going to be able to compete. I think as we have come to realize, there's a major flaw in this system in terms of how the seeding is done. I think we're all in agreement here that the auto seeding has to go. Just rank them 1 through 4. If you win a conference championship, yes, you are guaranteed a spot in the college football playoff, but you should not be guaranteed the top 4 seed for winning the American Conference or the Conference USA. No slander against them. Just that shouldn't be a thing. Hey, and that's saying the same thing about the SEC. If you win the SEC as a 3-loss team, you shouldn't be guaranteed a top 4 seed. Like, beyond all reasonable doubt. You shouldn't. I think that's fair to say across all conferences. I think that's the major flaw in the system. And hey, maybe this is the case where maybe the 7 and 8 seeds, as we saw, those turned out to be the 2 best teams in this playoff. They got hot at the right time. They played their best football at the right time. And maybe that's the argument against how we did the seeding process. Should we change the rule that Notre Dame can't be above a 5 seed? Does that need to change? I guess that's one of the questions I have now going forward is, are we doing a disservice to ourselves by not allowing a team like Notre Dame, who just made the national championship, to be ranked more than 5, higher than 5? That'd be my question.
Well, yeah, because if I remember right, in like the final rankings of the year, Notre Dame was inside the top 4. They just couldn't be anything except a lower seed. So it's not that they haven't been ranked really high. They have been all season. Same with Ohio State. Just the problem with this auto seeding process where you had to make room for Boise State. You had to make room for the other champions to kind of get in and be there. So I would think that would be the front. The biggest issue of this offseason would be the seeding. But from what I've heard on Twitter and some other places, it's not really being looked at as hard as maybe we would like.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess just final takeaway, and this isn't really a takeaway, it's more of a question, more of a hot topic. I think the narrative that has been going around for the last 4 weeks has been the debate between the SEC and the Big Ten. I know we touched on it, I think, 2 weeks ago. Gentlemen, the Big Ten has won back-to-back national titles for the first time since 1940 through 42. But the SEC still has won 14 of the last 19 national titles. Is there parity among conferences now? Is the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten closing? Has the Big Ten surpassed the SEC? What is our take? Because there is this national divide. Fox, shocker, thinks the Big Ten is the best conference. ESPN, shocker, thinks the SEC is the best conference. I mean, for Christ's sakes, it's like political news now. We got Fox over there supporting the right, and you got CNN supporting the left, and it's like, hey, the ESPN's not going to be on their TV contract. They're going to pump up their conference, and Fox is going to pump up their conference. Like, it's just a big debate now.
And somewhere in between, Danny Cannell's screaming that the ACC is the best thing you've ever seen in your life.
Hey, Danny Cannell's non-legacy media. That's what he is in terms of this conversation. Dan, what are your thoughts?
The best conference in college football is I believe day in and day out is the SEC, and I think it's just one of those arguments that it's kind of foolish, to be honest. I mean, the Big Ten has done a really good. Yeah, the Big Ten has done a really good job of making football more of a priority. I think in the past, the Big Ten was more focused on everything being level, like all of their sports across the board being at a really high level. And I think history will prove that out to be where the Big Ten has been really competitive in every single sport. Whereas the SEC, I believe, is starting to put more effort into making every other sport competitive. I think this year in particular, the Big Ten really made a focus and a big push, and then they went out and got 2 really good football teams. And I think we were kind of hurt a little bit by Oklahoma not being what Oklahoma was supposed to be. But listen, I mean, between the Big Ten and the SEC, man, there's some really good football teams, and I don't think it matters, to be completely honest. It's just me.
This is going to be my opinion on this, and Commissioner Sankey, if for some reason you see this, I love you. I think the commissioner of the Big Ten, the where they have gotten their flowers recently has been by bringing in really good schools and then having really good schools like Michigan and making their schedule in a way where, just like we saw this year, a lot of the top teams in the Big Ten didn't play the other top teams in the Big Ten. We also saw that with someone in the SEC. One school in the SEC, our new darling child from Texas, the Longhorns. A brand new season, first season in the SEC. You basically play Georgia. Everybody else, you play at home. You play some easy road games. Georgia, you thought playing in Austin was going to be a win. I look at that. I look at what they've done for the Oregons, the Michigans, the Ohio States of There's not really a ton of big games early on. And then you play one big game in Ohio State's, you play in Indiana and you play Oregon at Oregon. There are some, but I just think week in, week out, like if you're telling me we had to go to Northwestern, I just think that's a easier time than having to go maybe to an Arkansas or something like that. And maybe that's just me. And that's a good job on their commissioner by taking their top teams and trying to protect them in a day and age that there's no reason to beat people up. There's no reason that we have to go to Alabama, to Ole Miss, to Texas, all these places. There's zero reason. The whole goal now is how many teams can you have in the 12-team playoff? And if the SEC can have 4 or 5, I'm telling you, we should be having 4 or 5. We shouldn't be playing an SEC championship game. We should be limiting how many inter-squad games we play amongst the conference. And let's go duke it out in the postseason because that's where it really matters.
Great points there, Kobe. Dan, I got one additional segment that's not on the rundown sheet for today, and it's another hot topic-esque thing. After watching how this postseason has gone, what is the one thing Georgia needs to do this offseason and going into next season to make it back into national title contention?
They have to upgrade the roster, and we have to be elite at the areas that you got to be elite at. Outside, they always say build the roster from the inside out, and I think Kirby's done a really good job of building the inside of the roster, meaning offensive line, defensive line. Even though our offensive line wasn't necessarily as great as we all thought it would be this year, much in the same way with Florida State, not nearly to that level, but we got to make sure we're spending our money in the right spots, getting the right people into the building, keeping the right guys, getting rid of the right guys. I know it's a lot. Roster management has become something that we never had to consider in the past, but roster management is everything now. And, we're kind of in a situation where the best team in the country could change overnight. It really could. If you have mass exodus from one place and everybody ends up at the other place, it can happen. So I really think Georgia has to really get this roster management right. And I saw a post, I think it was on 3 or something like that, put that Georgia's win expectancy next year was 7.5. You've got to be fucking kidding me. Are you serious?
That was regular season, just the 12 games.
I don't care.
Yeah,
that's insane.
I think Texas leads the SEC with like 9. I think Texas has like 10, 9.5, 10.5, which is the most in the conference, I believe.
I mean, we host Alabama, Ole Miss, and Texas, and they're still projecting for us to lose 4 games.
Toughest road games, Tennessee, and then Auburn.
Jeez. Who did Kirby have to pay for that?
Kobe, what's your take? What's the one thing you need to see?
Yeah, I think it was no different. Like you read those stats from the national championship game. The people that can control the line of scrimmage and have the ability to run the ball at will, they win football games. It's won football games since they, played them in front of 20 people and the coaches played quarterback. It's won them, this year. It just wins. Controlling the line of scrimmage, imposing your will, moving people that do not want to be moved. It is just the consistent thing in college football. And I think that was our big question this year, like Dan's saying, is a line that was really good that has battled a lot of injuries. We just never were able to quite establish the consistent run game throughout the entire season that we needed to keep games close or to keep games, in reach. To me, if you were able to run the ball against Notre Dame, you would have had a lot greater success, but you really had to go to the pass early and often. And the problem with the pass is, you drop one here or there, you have a bad no call on a pass interference, and you're punting the ball. So it is what it is. I think the roster is going to be fine. I've enjoyed the additions that we've made this offseason so far. Have to just keep believing in who I still believe is the best head coach in college football right this second. There's no reason to abandon ship by any means.
Kind of bouncing off what Kobe just made there and his point, what he needs to see. I think the one thing I need to see, and bounces right off what Kobe said, Georgia needs to find what they're good at, needs to find their identity, and they need to stick to it. I think this year it was so game to game that you just never knew. And when all the chips were down, when nothing was going right, you saw what happened in that Notre Dame game. Got to find something. In the past, they've been really good at the run. They leaned heavy on the run to open up the pass. This year, in the last 2 years, really, they've passed to open up the run. Georgia needs to find their identity, and they need to find the talent that helps execute what they want to do at a very, very high level. I think that was the problem this year. I think they were trying to do too many things. It looked like they didn't have the talent to be a run-first team. They didn't have the talent up front to do that, but they also didn't have the receivers to be a pass-first team. And I think that was a glaring issue that hurt them all year long. And I think they got to get back to, hey, this is who we are, this is our identity, and we're going to build our offense around this identity. Anyways, that will wrap up our segments of the show, our business. Now let's get to the fun part. Our friend Kobe has his debut blind draft ready for Dan and I. Just a quick reminder before we let Kobe remind everybody or tell everybody what the topic is. The blind draft is Dan and I this week will be drafting, not knowing what comes next. It's typically rankings, whatever. So it could be, I don't know what Kobe has in terms of rankings. Last week or 2 weeks ago, we ranked 8 quarterbacks of the college football playoff era, 1 through 8. They didn't know whether I was going to give them Trevor Lawrence, Tua Tagovailoa, Mac Jones. They didn't know who's coming next. So we're doing that similar this week. Kobe has a new topic for us. And as Kobe explains what the topic is, I will get the show notes sheet ready.
Yeah, so we're going to do it a little bit different. I was just trying to think about all the lists, all the postseason lists, all the people that talk about, my favorite thing, right, is the test of who is this team going to be compared to? Would Ohio State 2025 beat 2019 LSU? And it just runs, but it runs in circles, Dan. Is this team better than Miami 01? Is this team better than Alabama 2020? Over and over and over again. And so I was reading through some of those on Twitter. I was like, we're going to take a stab at it in a different light. We're going to rank national championship losers of the college football playoff era. Dang. Seven different losers. I think it's 7. 1, 2, 3, 4. 8 different losers, college football playoff era.
I'm grabbing those 8, getting those 8 numbers ready, and we will rock and roll.
And so what I'll do is I'll tell you the year. Reminder, it's weird because all the championships were played in the new year. I'll tell you the team that lost. If you need help, I'll tell you the team they lost to, kind of let you get more of an understanding of when this is in case maybe you don't remember as well.
You might want to tell us that from the jump.
Okay.
How do we want to start it? We'll let Dan rank this first one first, and then I'll go second, and we'll rotate.
Okay.
That's cool.
We'll practice that way, Dan. You can kind of understand. Start off with an easy one, Dan, just so you understand. We're going to do 2025 Notre Dame loses to Ohio State in the first expanded playoffs. Where would you rank 2025 Notre Dame?
I'm trying to think of all the teams that lost now. There's some real stinkers, and then there's some good ones. I will put them at number 3.
Ooh.
I felt like they were a pretty good team.
Okay.
Yeah, like Dan, there's some real stinkers here, but I'm putting up 5. I think there's a middle ground here in between probably one of the worst teams we saw make the national championship in terms of performance. So I'm going to leave room for them there at the bottom.
Perfect. All right. I have up next the Clemson team in 2020 with Trevor Lawrence as a junior that lost to LSU and Joe Burrow.
I guess I'll go first and Stan went first last. To me, this is one of the greatest teams to never win a national title. So I'm going to go ahead and put them in that number 1 spot. If they didn't run into Joe Burrow, this team is your national championship winner from that 2019-2020 season. Bar none.
Okay.
Well, all right. So, like, we're not going so far back to like the Miami team that lost. So,
College
okay.
football playoffs
All right.
only.
Yeah, I'll go number 2.
Okay.
I may have shot myself in the foot there, but we'll see.
We'll see. All right. Next up, we have the 2024 Washington Huskies that lost to Jim Harbaugh's Michigan team. This would be the loser of last season. Michael Penix leading Huskies.
I will go 6. This is a pretty loaded team.
Yeah. Michael Penix was on a Hummer that year. Just last season. Adunze, yep. Adunze. Who was the other guy? They had
McMillan, right?
McMillan. Ooh. I don't know if that team beats this Notre Dame team, so I'm gonna put them there at 6 with Dan.
Okay. All right, we got one that you're gonna have to think back some a little bit. We've got I'll start. I'll save them. We're gonna do 2023 TCU versus Georgia.
Thank you. I'm putting TCU 2023 in my number 8 spot.
Same.
Okay. There we go. I mean, when you get beat 65-7, the largest defeat, the heaviest defeat in college football playoff history, bar none, you're the bottom.
Perfect.
Sorry, Max Duggan.
No worries. Okay, next up, we got 2015 Marcus Mariota led Oregon versus Ohio State.
Dan, you're first up.
First year college football playoff.
First year college football playoff. It's the Oregon team that beat Jameis in the Rose Bowl.
God, who's on that team? Mariota.
They had the running back that ended up being like a flex guy in the NFL.
Is that DeAnthony Thomas?
Yes. I'll go 6 or 5. I'll go 5. I don't think that was a stinker team.
Does that team beat number 5 Notre Dame? God.
I may have completely screwed mine up, but all right.
I'll put them right above Notre Dame, 2015. I think Marcus Mariota gets it done versus Notre Dame.
I think we forget how good Mariota was in college.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to get into – now I got the thick of it for you. Some teams that I think were some hummers. I got the 2018 Georgia Bulldogs that lost in an overtime game to the Alabama Crimson Tide.
I think I go first here. I'm not regretting the number 1 pick. I think that 2020 Clemson team is probably the best loser of the college football playoff era. Now, Kobe could come at me and say, hey, dummy, here's a good one, and just totally wreck this for me. I am going to go out on a limb and just hope to God that Kobe doesn't give me some like nuclear Alabama team or nuclear Ohio State team that I'm forgetting about. I'm going to put 2018 Georgia. Ooh, I don't know. All right, to be safe, I'm putting 2018 Georgia here at number 3. You have Sony Michel, Nick Chubb on offense. You have Terry Godwin, Javon Wims. The one thing that holds me back from putting them at number 2 is they weren't elite at quarterback. They were good at quarterback that year. Jake Fromm played well, but I don't know. I'm trying to rack my brain for who else is coming next. If they ran
Alabama,
up an elite quarterback,
you messed up. Georgia's number 1.
Woo!
You missed the Alabama team, Harrison, and now you're going to have to put them over Georgia, and shame on you.
Okay, so here's Dan. Alabama 2017, they lose in the pick play to Clemson in the revenge game of Dabo after a beatdown the year before.
No, because there's 2 Alabama teams that lost. He's going to give them both to us. Oh, man, because if he does, the other Alabama should be at 4, and this Alabama should be at the bottom. But if he doesn't, then I'm really screwed. Damn it. I'll put that Alabama team at 7.
7. 27.
I got 4 and 7 left, bro.
I'm gonna go ahead and put them at number 2. That was a pretty damn good team. I don't know if I take Jalen Hurts over the Georgia team in retrospect, but I guess I'll have to settle because if, like Dan said, if it's 2023 Alabama, they're taking up my number 7 spot. Although I would put them above Washington and maybe Notre Dame.
So sorry, Dan, about this. I maybe should have prefaced, but it could be a stinker. I didn't put any repeat offenders on here. So our final game is 2021 COVID year, Ohio State. Justin Fields led Ohio State, losing to Alabama.
That was actually a good team. I'm okay putting them at 4. I'm not that upset about it.
That would have who all did that team have? JMO was the third. I remember him hitting that.
Garrett Wilson playing by that year. Garrett Wilson was I don't know if he was starting, but he was on that team.
Olave's there too.
Olave.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a bad football team.
No.
They had a wagon in terms of offensive skill players over there.
Trey Sermon at running back, if I remember right. Yeah.
I'm happy with how this list came out. Obviously, I would bump up Ohio State probably to around this Oregon team. But other than that, I think the bottom 3 of Notre Dame, Washington, and TCU, I think that's pretty solid. I think 3 out of the 4 bottoms for me is really, really solid. Dan, what do you say about yours?
I think I would move that Alabama team up to number 3 and then slide everybody down, and that'd be okay.
Really solid angle here, Kobe. Yeah. I wasn't expecting him to come up with this because this is really good because I don't see this talked about much in terms of ranking the losers.
I forgot about losers.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I figured if I did winners, like it would be easy to remember. Like obviously we all compare the winners, but I think it's always those teams that you forget about, like you're talking about in years that did the best team actually win. I still think if we lose the Rose Bowl in 2017, I think Oklahoma dog walks Alabama in that game. I mean, I personally believe that what we were able to do in California that night kept Oklahoma from beating Alabama and winning that national championship. And so I think that's what's always so interesting is that
kind of like
go ahead.
Us losing to Alabama cost us the national championship against Notre Dame that year.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yep. Kobe, just curious, how would you have ranked them?
Let's see. Read both of y'all's lists.
I guess I can go ahead.
Yeah.
Real quick.
That Clemson team was disgusting. I think they're probably the best team not to win one. I'm with you. I think Georgia that year was really good. I just think about the ones that were close. Like Marcus Mariota, man, he was just so good at Oregon, never to win one. Like you're saying, I would say that Ohio State team from the COVID year was, or the year after COVID, I guess, or that was the COVID year. Sorry.
Was COVID year, yeah.
It was COVID year. Let's see. I would say, TCU is definitely the bottom. I would say, I'm trying to think. Like you're saying, it kind of gets hard. That I think that Washington team is probably my 5. I would probably put, who's that leave me with?
Leaves you with Bama 17, Oregon 15, and Notre Dame 25.
Yeah, so I'm probably going with Bama 17 right there because, I mean, without the pick play, they win it. And then I'm going Notre Dame and then probably Oregon, which is just recency bias, honestly, because Marcus Mariota, I'm not sure, didn't just run a hole through Notre Dame.
I think these are some solid rankings right here. Not too much difference between the list. We varied just a slight bit. Obviously, for me, I would want 2021 Ohio State up a little bit because they had a unit over there in offense. But I think all around, some great list here. As I mess up Kobe's name on accident, my bad. Yeah, Kobe, hell of a pull here, dude. Hell of a pull. The losers don't get talked about. And hey, that's the old saying always goes. They don't remember second place. So we certainly remember second place on this show.
Yeah.
Not a reflection of how many times Georgia's come to second place. But anyways, folks, that's going to wrap it up today for the Top Dog Talk podcast. I'm Harrison Reno. That's Dan Colley to my right and Kobe Pierce down there to the bottom, former Georgia Bulldog himself. Kobe Pierce was on the sideline for that Georgia-Oklahoma 2017 Rose Bowl game. One of the greatest games of all time, no doubt. Still, we are holding off on the Kobe Pierce Rose Bowl Perspective show. It's probably coming sometime this offseason. When we need a content day, we're about to just drill them on that game and talk about it.
Kobe, what was your last game?
Was it Baylor?
Baylor, yeah. Baylor in the Sugar Bowl.
What a shitty game to end it on.
Hey, George Pickens' legacy game, though.
I mean, we won. It was better than the Sugar Bowl the year before.
Oh, wait. Yeah, my bad. It was a Texas State loss. They won Baylor.
Yeah.
I don't know why I thought. I don't know. My brain's just gone to shit.
Still, that Baylor season was.
Wait, that was who's the coach at Baylor?
OC Matt Rule.
Yeah, right after that game, he took the job of Carolina.
Yep.
I forgot about that.
So, it was a great game. It was a good Baylor team.
What was the score?
I don't even remember, honestly.
Wait, is that a game we came from behind?
Mm-mm. We beat them pretty good.
I thought we were trailing. I thought we were trailing at one point.
It was 26-14, and Georgia took a 19-0 lead in the second quarter.
So we kind of held on to it then. Interesting.
Yeah.
Shows how much attention.
Which game was it where
George Pickens had 175 yards and 12 touchdowns? Good.
What game was it DeAndre Baker opted out like the day before the game?
Yeah, that was the Texas game the year before.
Yeah.
All right. That's the game I'm thinking of.
That was also the year
that changed the way it changed the way that Kirby handles everything.
Yeah, that game.
No comment for that year.
No comment. All right. Well, might have to get an exclusive on that one over here on the show at some point if Kobe's willing to divulge. Anyways, folks, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. We'll be back next Wednesday, 7:30, unless otherwise stated. We're trying to be here every Wednesday at 7:30, unless something pops up, of course, then we can't make it. Anyways, Dan, Kobe, here's your cue.
Good dogs.
Good dogs.